How you doing? My name is Pedro. I'm founder of NJ4Kids, NJ4PE.org. I want to talk a little bit about a touchy subject. You always see in the news, that the non-custodial parent, usually the father, is involved in a murder-suicide or pretty much murder-suicide or suicide. We don't condone any, we don't approve any violence of any nature. But what I want to talk about a little is how society just views that. I'm not going to make any excuses for it. What I'm trying to say is, let's not quickly judge the situation by just the outcome. Why not investigate a little bit deeper and look at the similarities that are there? You see it all the time, where, like I said, there's involve a non-custodial father, and he's involved in a murder-suicide, where he'll either kill his kids, the ex, and then kills himself, or just kills the ex and himself and leave the kids alone. And what do they have in common? Like I said, is family court. The numbers are out there when it comes to suicide rates. Dr. Capasoa, if I pronounce his name right, did a study where men going through divorce, separation, basically family court, is 2.14 times likely to commit suicide. It's almost 3 times. That number is just astronomical. It's disturbing. But my point is this, is that socially is not acceptable when this is the outcome in custody disputes, where they just look at the violent act. No one looks at behind the scenes. But like I said, I wanted to create a video about this, but I had pretty much what to say until yesterday, when somebody gave me on our Facebook page, a woman had commented on how it's more socially acceptable on postpartum depression. But when it comes to murder-suicides, is not socially acceptable. And neither one should be, but you have to look at it in a deeper sense and why these happen. And that's the problem, is that we're not looking into deeper on why this situation is the way it is, and you have these extreme outcomes. And they don't look into it any further because of the financial gain the domestic violence industry receives off of this. Why try to fix that when it's actually going to hurt their funding and their programs? And just continue making usually the father look like he's a violent person instead of a victim of the way family court operates. There's enforcements on child support orders. There's enforcements on restraining orders, even without due process, which is unconstitutional. But there's no enforcement on visitation. You're forced to do everything else, but when it comes to have your right as a parent taken away, you're gonna feel depressed. It's gonna mess you up psychologically, emotionally, physically, and they're not looking into this, because it'll hurt their pocket, it'll hurt their funding. Instead, they continue making fathers look like they're the abuser. And what we have to do is educate the public how and why this is happening. And like I was explaining before in a couple of my videos, facts, truth doesn't mean anything in family court. These judges get their salary and pensions based off of the Title 4D funding. This is why the rulings come into play like this, where a father has to fight for his rights to be a parent. And it shouldn't be that way. If you shouldn't have to prove that you're fit to be a father. If you're fit enough for a person to lay with you to create a child, why don't you have that same fit label? But because of this funding, it is the way it is. And the media pushes that men are aggressive, that men are violent, and so on. While Harvard did a study back in 2010 or 12 where it showed that 70% of domestic violence aggressors were women. So the numbers are there to prove that fathers and men aren't the aggressor. And we have to start training ourselves to think differently. And especially with these extreme cases, we have to start looking at it on why these results are happening the way they are, where psychologically, emotionally, that a father has to go that route and end his life and end his loved ones' lives. It shouldn't be that way. But like I explained, it's not socially acceptable that way. But when it comes to postpartum, it's socially acceptable. We have to start demanding investigations and studies on these cases and so on, and basically demand a family law reform. Thank you for watching. Actually, you know what? No. What I want to end it on is, this can be your child. We can be your child. And even if you're not affected through the way the system operates, no one holds a crystal ball to see where their child is going to end up in the future. And that's who we're trying to target. Thank you for watching.